Don't look up to your grandpa. He's been a loser his whole life. That's why we struggle. My son's words hung in the air of my own living room. I watched my 8-year-old grandson's shoulders sink, his bright eyes going dim as he stared at his shoes. The boy who had run to me every weekend, who had called me his hero just that morning, now looked like he wanted to disappear. He had just humiliated me in front of the one person whose opinion actually mattered. And that was a mistake he would spend a very long time regretting. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories. The wooden blocks clicked together in my hands as Jake and I built our castle on the living room carpet. Saturday afternoons had become our sacred time, just the two of us, lost in whatever world his 8-year-old imagination conjured up. Today we were knights defending a kingdom, and I was content to be his faithful architect, watching his face light up with each new tower we added. "Grandpa, you're the best builder ever!" Jake's voice bubbled with genuine admiration. "Can you show me how to make the drawbridge work like the one in my book?" I was reaching for the string we'd need when a sharp curse echoed from the kitchen. My son David had been wrestling with the broken dishwasher for the better part of an hour, and from the sounds of increasingly frustrated grunting and clanking, it wasn't going well. This was the third appliance this month. First the washing machine, then the garbage disposal. Now this. Each time he'd insisted on fixing it himself, each time growing more agitated when his YouTube tutorials failed to deliver instant expertise. "Sure thing, buddy," I said, focusing on Jake's eager face. "See, we need to create a pivot point here." I began threading the string through the small holes I'd carved in the wood last week. This wasn't just any castle. I'd been working on the pieces for months, handcrafting each block in my workshop, sanding them smooth, adding tiny details that would spark his imagination. Another crash from the kitchen, followed by David's voice. "This piece of junk, why can't anything just work in this house?" Jake's eyes flickered toward the kitchen, then back to our project. "Grandpa," he whispered conspiratorially, "how do you always know how to fix everything? Daddy gets so mad when things break, but you just make them work." The innocence in his question made my chest tight. How could I explain that fixing things, whether broken toys, leaky pipes, or wounded hearts, had been my life's work? That every skill I developed, every late night I'd spent learning something new, had been for moments exactly like this one? "Well," I said, helping him guide the string through the mechanism, "sometimes when you've been around as long as I have, you pick up a few tricks, but the real secret is patience, Jake. Things break, but they can always be fixed if you take your time and think it through." "Damn it!" David's shout made us both jump. Something heavy hit the floor, followed by the sound of tools scattering. "This is impossible. These things are designed to break, so you have to buy new ones." I felt Jake tense beside me, his small hands stilling on the castle. The joy that had been radiating from him moments before began to dim, replaced by that familiar anxiety that crept into children when the adults around them lose control. "It's okay," I murmured, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Let's keep working on our bridge." But David appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with frustration, hands grimy with grease and failure. His eyes swept over our elaborate construction, and I saw something flicker across his expression, not pride in his son's happiness, but something darker. Resentment, maybe. Or shame. "Dad," David said, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation, "don't you think you should be helping me instead of playing games? This dishwasher isn't going to fix itself, and we can't afford to call someone." The criticism stung, not because it was harsh, but because it was so predictably unfair. This was David's pattern. Attempt something beyond his skill level, become frustrated when it didn't work immediately, then lash out at whoever was nearest. Usually me. "I can take a look in a few minutes," I said calmly, not wanting to disrupt Jake's afternoon. "We're just finishing up here. Grandpa knows how to fix dishwashers too," Jake piped up with devastating innocence. "He fixed ours last month when it was leaking all over the floor. Remember, Daddy? And he showed me how the pump works and everything." The silence that followed was loaded with something dangerous. David's jaw clenched, and I recognized the look that always preceded his worst moments. That specific combination of wounded pride and misdirected anger that had been poisoning our relationship for years. "Jake," David said, his voice dropping to a tone I'd learned to fear. Come here. My grandson looked between us, sensing the shift in atmosphere but not understanding it. He stood slowly, leaving our half-finished castle behind, and walked to his father with the trusting obedience of a child who still believed adults were fundamentally good. That's when David looked down at his son, his face hard with 30 years of accumulated resentment, and said the words that would change everything. Don't look up to your grandpa. He's been a loser his whole life. That's why we struggle. Jake's face crumpled like paper in rain. The light that had been dancing in his eyes just moments before, that pure, uncomplicated adoration he'd always shown me, flickered and died. His small mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to say something, to defend me, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stood there, caught between his father's harsh proclamation and the grandfather he'd always believed could fix anything. I watched my grandson's world tilt on its axis, and something inside me went completely still. Not the explosive anger David was probably expecting, not the wounded protest he'd grown accustomed to over the years. Just stillness, the kind that comes before carefully planned action. David, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Come on, let's go look at that dishwasher. I stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from my knees, and placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. The boy was still frozen in place, his young mind trying to process what had just happened. Jake, why don't you work on the castle tassel towers while we're gone? I'll be right back to help with that drawbridge. My grandson nodded mutely, his eyes never quite meeting mine now. The trust was still there, but it was wounded, confused, and that was unforgivable. David followed me into the kitchen, his expression shifting from righteous anger to something more uncertain. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that my calm reaction wasn't what he'd expected. In our usual script, this was where I would get defensive, where I would try to justify myself or explain all the ways I'd supported this family. This was where he would get to feel righteous about his accusations. But I wasn't following the script today. I surveyed the dishwasher situation. The front panel was off, tools scattered across the floor, water pooled around the base. It was actually a simple fix, probably just a loose connection in the drain hose. 5 minutes, maybe 10 at most. So, I said, crouching down to examine the problem, my tone conversational, almost friendly, want to tell me why you just said that to your son? Said what? David's voice carried that defensive edge I knew so well. That I'm a loser, that I'm the reason you struggle. I straightened up, meeting his eyes directly, in front of Jake. David's jaw tightened. He needs to understand reality, Dad. He can't go through life thinking everyone's some kind of hero. Reality. I repeated the word slowly, as if I was tasting it. Is that what we're calling it? I picked up the flashlight he'd dropped and shined it into the dishwasher's interior. David, if you have something to say to me, say it to me. Don't use your 8-year-old son as your messenger. I'm not using him as anything. I'm teaching him. You're teaching him that it's okay to humiliate people who love him. My voice remained level, but there was something in it now that made David take half a step back. You're teaching him that when you're frustrated with your own limitations, you can take it out on whoever's convenient. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of water still dripping from the broken connection. David's face was cycling through emotions, surprise at my composure, irritation at my directness, and underneath it all, something that looked almost like fear. My limitations. His voice rose. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been standing here for over an hour, cursing at a machine, breaking things, getting more and more frustrated because you can't figure out what's wrong. I gestured at the mess around us, when you could have just asked for help. I don't need your help. No? I reached down and connected the loose hose with a simple twist. There. Fixed. David stared at the dishwasher, then at me, his face flushing darker. The machine hummed to life, water flowing where it should, the error light blinking off. That doesn't prove anything, he said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. It proves that pride makes people do stupid things, I said quietly, like spend hours fighting with a simple problem instead of accepting help, like blaming the person who raised you, supported you, bailed you out more times than either of us wants to count. Something shifted in David's expression. The uncertainty was being replaced by something uglier, more familiar. That look I'd seen building for years, resentment mixed with shame, looking for a target. Supported me? His voice was getting louder now, and I could hear the real anger underneath. You call what you did support? I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for without realizing it. The moment when the carefully constructed narrative he'd been building would finally come into the light. Dad, you handed me a bunch of problems and called it love. You think paying for things makes you some kind of saint, but you never. He stopped himself, but I could see the words fighting to get out. I never what, David? You never actually cared about what I wanted. The words exploded out of him like they'd been building pressure for years. It was always about what you thought was best, what you decided I needed. You controlled everything with your money, your help, your constant fixing everything. And there it was, the truth that had been poisoning our relationship, festering in the dark corners of his pride. All those years I thought I was building something. I was actually suffocating something else. But Jake was still in the next room, probably straining to hear every word. And that changed everything. The front door clicked open just as David's voice reached its peak volume. Mary's footsteps paused in the entryway. She'd heard enough to know something was wrong. I watched her appear in the kitchen doorway, grocery bags still clutched in her hands, her eyes quickly scanning the scene. The dishwasher humming peacefully, tools scattered on the floor, and her husband's face red with barely contained fury. "What's going on?" she asked, setting the bags down carefully. Her voice carried that particular wariness women develop when they walk into the aftermath of male conflict. "Dad's just," David started, but I held up a hand. "David," I said quietly, my eyes flicking toward the living room where Jake was undoubtedly listening to every word. "Your son is in the next room." But David was too far gone to care about discretion now. "No, Mary needs to hear this. She needs to understand what we've been dealing with." He turned to his wife, his voice taking on that tone people use when they're recruiting allies. "He thinks because he pays for things he can control everything. Tell her, Dad. Tell her about all the strings attached to your help." Mary's expression shifted as she processed this. I could see her mentally reviewing years of interactions and that reframing every generous gesture through the lens David was providing. It was fascinating in a cold way watching someone decide to believe a convenient narrative over their own experience. "David," I said again, my voice level but firmer, not in front of Jake. "Actually," Mary said, her voice taking on that edge I'd heard her use with difficult customers at her salon, "maybe David has a point." She crossed her arms, and I realized with stunning clarity that this wasn't spontaneous. This was coordinated. You could have just asked if he needed help instead of, waiting for him to struggle and then swooping in to save the day. The sheer audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. Here was the woman whose car I'd fixed countless times, whose mother's funeral I'd helped pay for, whose son I'd watched every weekend for 3 years, telling me I was the problem because I didn't wait for an invitation to help. "So I should have let him flood the kitchen?" I asked, genuinely curious about the logic. "You should have respected that he wanted to handle it himself," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "But you can't do that, can you? You always have to be the hero." David nodded emphatically. "Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You make me look incompetent in my own house." The irony was almost beautiful. He had spent an hour proving himself incompetent, but somehow that was my fault too. I found myself studying them both with a strange detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. This wasn't about the dishwasher, or even about control. This was about their need to blame someone else for their failures. "Grandpa?" Jake's small voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his castle forgotten, eyes wide with the confusion of a child trying to understand why the adults he trusted were saying terrible things about each other. "Are you really a loser?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mary's face went pale. Perhaps she was finally grasping what their adult conversation was doing to an 8-year-old. But David incredibly doubled down. "Jake, grown-ups are talking." But Grandpa fixed our dishwasher, Jake continued, his voice small but persistent, and he built me the castle, and he always knows how to make things work when they're broken. He looked between his parents with that heartbreaking earnestness that only children possess. Why are you saying mean things about him? Mary shifted uncomfortably. Sweetie, it's complicated. Is it because Daddy couldn't fix the dishwasher? Jake asked with devastating innocence. Is that why you're mad at Grandpa? The silence that followed was deafening. David's face cycled through several emotions: embarrassment, anger, and something that looked almost like recognition of how this must sound to his son. But instead of backing down, he seemed to harden further. Jake, go to your room, he said curtly. But I want to finish the castle with Grandpa. Now. I watched my grandson's face crumple again, saw him realize that the safe harbor of our Saturday afternoons was somehow under attack. He looked at me with those wide, confused eyes, silently begging me to fix this like I fixed everything else. But some things, I was beginning to understand, were broken by design, and some people needed them to stay that way. It's okay, Jake, I said softly. Go ahead. We'll finish the castle later. As Jake trudged out of the kitchen, his small shoulders carrying a burden no child should bear, I turned back to David and Mary. They stood there, united in their conviction that I was the problem, that my decades of support and sacrifice were somehow weapons I'd used against them. And for the first time in 30 years, I began to see them clearly. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. David and Mary stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to defend myself, to plead my case, to fall back into the familiar pattern where I apologized for existing and promised to do better. But something fundamental had shifted in me during the last 30 minutes. You know what? I said, my voice carrying a calm finality that seemed to catch them off guard. You're absolutely right. David blinked. What? You're right. I have been supporting you financially. The mortgage payments when you were behind, the car repairs, Jake's school supplies, the grocery money when things got tight. I leaned against the counter, completely relaxed. And you're also right that I do it to make myself feel good. Guilty as charged. Mary's eyes narrowed. This wasn't going the way she'd expected. So, I continued, since you've made it clear that my help is actually manipulation, and my support is really control, I'm going to solve that problem for you. Today. Right now, in fact. What are you talking about? David's voice had lost some of its righteous anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like alarm. I'm talking about setting you free from my terrible, controlling generosity. I reached for my phone. Let me just make a quick call to the bank. I'll cancel the automatic transfer that covers your mortgage shortfall. You know, the one that's been running for, what is it now? 14 months? The color drained from Mary's face. Wait a minute. Oh, and I should probably call your insurance company too. Cancel my policy on your car. Wouldn't want to keep manipulating you with my controlling need to make sure you can get to work safely. Dad, stop. David's voice had gone from angry to uncertain, fresh. You're being ridiculous. Am I? I looked at him with genuine curiosity. You just spent the last 20 minutes explaining to me how my help is actually harmful, how it makes you look incompetent, how it's all about my ego and my need to control you. I shrugged. I'm just listening to what you're telling me. Mary stepped forward, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I'd heard her use when she wanted something. That's not what we meant, and you know it. Then what did you mean? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it sounded like you were saying my support was unwelcome, that it was hurting you, that it was selfish on my part. David ran a hand through his hair, and I could see him trying to recalibrate. Look, we need some boundaries, okay? Some respect for our independence. Independence, I repeated the words slowly. You want independence from a man who pays half your bills? That's not. It's not about the money, Mary said, but her voice cracked slightly on the words. Isn't it, though? I asked. Let's see. Without my contributions, your monthly budget shortfall is what? $1,200? $1,500? I haven't really been keeping track since, according to you, it's all just manipulation anyway. The kitchen felt like a pressure cooker. David and Mary exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They were realizing that their emotional tantrum was about to have very real financial consequences. You can't just cut us off, David said, and there it was. The real David, stripped of his righteous indignation. We have obligations. Jake has needs. Of course you have obligations, I agreed pleasantly. That's what makes you adults. Independent adults who don't need a controlling father and grandfather manipulating them with his unwelcome help. You're twisting our words, Mary accused. Am I? Let me make sure I understand your position. I counted on my fingers. 1. My help makes David look incompetent. 2. I only help to make myself feel good. 3. I use my support to control you. 4. I should respect your independence and stop swooping in to save the day. I looked up at them. Does that about sum it up? They stared at me, trapped by their own logic. So tell me, I continued, how exactly am I supposed to continue financially supporting people who've just explained to me that my support is harmful and unwelcome? How does that work exactly? That's not what we said, David exploded. Then what did you say? We said, he stopped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Because what he'd said, what they'd both said, was exactly what I'd summarized, and now they were facing the logical conclusion of their accusations. This is emotional blackmail, Mary said finally. You're punishing us for speaking up. You got us dependent on your money, and now you're threatening to cut us off the moment we express how we really feel. The audacity of it was breathtaking. In the span of 30 minutes, I had gone from being a controlling manipulator to being an emotional blackmailer. My crime? Taking them at their word. So let me understand this new version, I said. I'm wrong when I help without being asked. I'm wrong when I help because it makes me feel good. And now I'm wrong when I offer to stop helping because you don't want it. I nodded thoughtfully. That's quite a comprehensive system you've worked out there. I'm wrong no matter what I do. That's not, David started. Grandpa, Jake's voice called from the living room, cutting through the tension. And with stop, can you come help me with the drawbridge? It's not working right. The three of us froze. In our heated exchange, we'd forgotten about the 8-year-old boy who still believed adults were fundamentally reasonable people. The child who was calling for his grandfather's help while his parents explained why that help was actually harmful. Coming, Jake, I called back, then turned to David and Mary. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go help my grandson with his castle. You two are going to figure out whether you want my help or my absence. But you don't get to have both my money and my apologies for giving it to you. I started toward the living room, then paused. Oh, and David, the next time you want to teach your son about reality, maybe start with the reality of who actually pays for his school clothes. The silence behind me was deafening. I found Jake sitting beside our castle, his small fingers tracing the towers we'd built together. The drawbridge hung at an awkward angle, the string tangled around one of the wooden blocks. He looked up when I approached, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. Grandpa, the bridge is broken, he said softly. Let's see what we can do about that, I replied, settling down beside him on the carpet. My knees protested. I wasn't as young as I used to be, but being at his level felt important right now. I could hear David and Mary's voices from the kitchen, low and urgent, but I pushed them out of my mind. This moment belonged to Jake. I untangled the string carefully, my fingers working to restore the mechanism we'd been so excited about just an hour ago. Sometimes things get twisted up, I said, more to myself than to him, but usually they can be fixed. Grandpa? Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. Why are Mommy and Daddy mad at you? The question hit me like a physical weight. How do you explain adult selfishness and ingratitude to a child who still believes the world makes sense? How do you tell an 8-year-old that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will hurt you for reasons that have nothing to do with you? Well, buddy, I said, threading the string through the tiny holes I'd carved with such care, sometimes grown-ups disagree about things. It doesn't mean anyone is bad. It just means we see things differently. But you always help us, Jake said, his voice carrying that matter-of-fact tone children use when stating obvious truths. You fixed our car when it wouldn't start, and you helped Daddy build my treehouse, and you bought me my school backpack when Mommy said they didn't have money. Each word was like a small dagger, not because Jake was wrong, but because he was so completely, innocently right. I do like to help, I said carefully. That's what families do for each other. Then why did Daddy say you were He struggled with the word. A loser? I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 30 years of sacrifice being reduced to that single cruel word in the mind of the person who mattered most to me. When I opened them, Jake was watching me with those trusting eyes, waiting for an explanation that would make the world make sense again. Sometimes, I said slowly, when people are upset about their own problems, they say things they don't really mean. Your daddy is frustrated about some things, and sometimes when we're frustrated, we say things that hurt people. Are you hurt, Grandpa? The simple question nearly broke me. A little, I admitted. But I'm more worried about you understanding that none of this is your fault. The grown-ups are having a disagreement, but that doesn't change how much I love you or how much your parents love you. Jake nodded solemnly, then picked up one of the castle blocks. Will you still come on Saturdays? Before I could answer, David's voice carried from the kitchen doorway. Actually, Jake, Grandpa thinks it's better if he doesn't come around for a while. I turned to see David standing there, Mary beside him. Their faces were set in that particular expression adults wear when they've made a decision they know is wrong but can't back down from. Mary wouldn't meet my eyes. That's not what, I started. Dad, I think you should go, David said, his voice flat. You've made your point. You've shown us what life looks like without your help. Message received. Jake looked between us, his confusion deepening. But we didn't finish the castle. We'll finish it another time, buddy, I said, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. I could see Mary shifting uncomfortably, some part of her recognizing how cruel this was, but she remained silent. Actually, David continued, his voice gaining that hard edge I'd come to dread, I think it's better if you don't come around for a while. Jake needs to understand that we can take care of ourselves. That we don't need someone swooping in to save us all the time. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Jake's sharp intake of breath. I watched my grandson's face crumple as he realized what was happening, that the adults he trusted were breaking apart his world, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. David, I said quietly, don't do this to him. Don't do what? Teach him independence? Show him that his parents are capable of taking care of him? David's voice was rising again. You've made it clear what you think of our parenting, of our abilities. Well, now you get to see us handle things on your own. Mary finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should just... No, David cut her off. He made his choice. He wants to withdraw his support? Fine. But he doesn't get to keep playing grandfather while holding our failures over our heads. I looked at Jake, who was staring at the broken drawbridge in his hands. His small shoulders were shaking, and I realized he was trying not to cry. This beautiful, innocent child was being used as a weapon in an adult war he didn't understand. Okay, I said finally, standing up slowly. My knees protested again, but more than that, my heart felt like it was being torn from my chest. Jake, I want you to remember something, okay? He looked up at me, tears threatening to spill over. This castle isn't broken, it's just paused. And sometimes when things are paused, it gives us time to think about how to make them even better. I knelt down and hugged him, breathing in that little boy's smell of soap and innocence. I love you, buddy. That never changes, no matter what. I love you too, Grandpa, he whispered against my shoulder. I stood and looked at David and Mary one last time. They stood there like sentries, guarding their pride and their narrative, patterned like willing to sacrifice their son's happiness to maintain their version of events. You know where to find me, I said simply. I walked to the front door, picked up my jacket, and stepped out into the afternoon air. Behind me, I could hear Jake's quiet sobs and Mary's urgent whisper to David, though I couldn't make out the words. As I drove away from the house I'd helped them buy, from the life I'd helped them build, I realized something profound had just happened. For 30 years, I'd been playing by their rules, accepting their version of our relationship. But now, for the first time, I was free to write my own story. And I was going to make sure it had a very different ending than the one they expected. 5 days. That's how long it took for their carefully constructed narrative to collide with reality. I'd spent those 5 days doing something I hadn't done in years. Living for myself. I cleaned my workshop, organizing tools that had been gathering dust while I fixed other people's problems. The familiar weight of the hammer in my hand felt therapeutic. The smell of sawdust and oil, a reminder of who I was before I became their perpetual solution. I read books I'd been meaning to get to, took long walks through the neighborhood I'd helped half my family buy houses in, even called my old friend Pete for coffee. It was strange, this quiet life without crisis calls and financial emergencies that needed immediate solving. The first call came on Tuesday morning at 7:43 a.m. I know because I was staring at the clock, wondering if Mary thought early morning calls would catch me vulnerable, still half asleep and easy to manipulate. "Hi, it's me." Her voice carried that particular strain of someone trying to sound casual about a catastrophe. I could picture her in their kitchen, the one I'd helped renovate 2 years ago, probably pacing, maybe chewing her lip the way she did when she was nervous. "Just wondering, did you remember to transfer the mortgage money this month? The bank called and there might be some confusion." I settled deeper into my kitchen chair, feeling oddly peaceful. The morning light streamed through windows I'd installed myself, warming my shoulders. "No confusion," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of coffee. The taste seemed richer somehow, not rushed between crisis calls. "I canceled all the automatic transfers, just like I told you I would." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost hear her mental gears spinning, recalculating. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its artificial lightness. "You actually, but we thought you were just..." "Just what? Making empty threats? Bluffing?" I settled back in my chair, watching a cardinal land on the feeder I'd built last spring. "You told me my help was unwelcome, Mary. You said it was manipulation, remember? That I only helped to make myself look good?" I listened. Her breathing changed, shorter, more panicked. I could imagine David in the background, probably getting ready for work, oblivious to the financial quicksand opening beneath their feet. "But the bank fee, if we're late, there's a penalty, and..." "That sounds like something independent adults would handle," I said gently. She hung up without another word. I heard the sharp click and sat there for a moment, surprised by how calm I felt. No guilt, no urge to call back and fix everything. Just stillness. The second call came that evening at exactly 6:15 p.m. David this time, and I could tell immediately he'd been building up to this all day. His voice vibrated with that particular frequency of a man whose pride was hemorrhaging. "Dad, this is ridiculous." The words came out clipped, controlled, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. "You're being petty and vindictive, and you know it." I was in my living room, settling into the leather recliner I'd bought for myself last Christmas, the first gift I'd given myself in years, instead of spending everything on them. "Am I?" I kept my voice neutral, curious. "Yes!" The word exploded out of him, and I could hear Mary's voice in the background, probably coaching him. "You're punishing us because we had the courage to tell you the truth about your behavior. This is exactly what manipulation looks like, threatening to destroy our lives because we dared to speak up." I set down the book I'd been reading, something about chess strategy that seemed oddly relevant to my current situation. The irony wasn't lost on me that David, who'd spent 30 years letting me solve his problems, was now lecturing me about manipulation. "Let me make sure I understand your logic," I said, and I could feel my own pulse, slow, steady. "When I provided financial support, that was manipulation. And when I stopped providing financial support, that's also manipulation." "That's not. You're twisting everything again." His voice pitched higher, and I recognized the sound of a man whose arguments were unraveling in real time. "I'm not twisting anything, David. I'm simply doing exactly what you asked me to do. You wanted independence." I paused. Let him hear the weight of his own words. "You wanted me to stop swooping in to save the day. You wanted me to respect your ability to handle your own problems." Another pause. Longer this time. "How's that working out for you?" The silence stretched. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel his frustration radiating through the phone. When he spoke again, his voice was raw with anger and something that sounded almost like desperation. "This isn't about independence, and you know it. This is about you being a petty, spiteful old man who can't handle criticism." The words should have hurt. A week ago, they would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and desperate attempts to justify myself. But something had changed in me that day in the kitchen. when I watched Jake's face crumple and realized that their war on me was collateral damage to an innocent child. Their cruelty had burned away something soft and needy, leaving behind something harder and clearer. "David," I said quietly, and my voice carried a weight I didn't know I possessed. "I spent 30 years trying to be the father you needed. I supported you through college when you changed majors 3 times. I helped you buy your house when your credit was destroyed from that business venture you swore would make you rich. I covered your debts when that same business failed and you were too proud to declare bankruptcy." I could hear him starting to interrupt, but I pressed on. "I paid for Jake's medical bills when he was born, and your insurance wouldn't cover the NICU stay. I never asked for gratitude, never kept score, never threw any of it back in your face. Until now. Until you looked me in the eye and called me a loser in front of my grandson." My voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now, forged in 5 days of clarity. "Until you told an 8-year-old boy that the man who loves him most in this world is worthless. Until you decided that hurting me was more important than protecting your son's sense of security. I was trying to teach him about reality. You were trying to hurt me, and you used your own son to do it." I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the garden I'd been neglecting while rushing to solve everyone else's problems. The tomatoes I'd planted were heavy on the vine, red and perfect. When was the last time I'd actually enjoyed the fruits of my own labor? "The truth, David, is that you've never been independent. You've been dependent on me for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to actually handle your own life." "That's not true." But his voice cracked slightly on the denial. "Isn't it? When was the last time you paid your full mortgage without my help? When was the last time you made it through a month without calling me for money or repairs or to fix something you broke trying to prove you didn't need me?" I could feel his discomfort through the phone, the weight of accumulated dependence he'd never wanted to acknowledge. "Hell, David, when was the last time you changed your own oil?" The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken truths and willful blindness. "And now," I continued, and my voice carried a sadness that surprised even me, "instead of learning to be independent, you're calling me names. Instead of figuring out how to solve your problems, you're blaming me for not solving them for you. You want to know what manipulation looks like, David? It looks like a grown man calling his father petty because daddy stopped paying his bills. You're destroying our family." The words came out strangled, and I could hear Mary crying in the background now. Real tears, not the controlled drama from before. "No," I said, and my voice was infinitely sad now, heavy with the weight of 30 years of sacrifices that had been rewritten as crimes. "You destroyed our family the moment you decided to poison your son's love for me, rather than face your own failures. You destroyed it when you chose to make me the villain of your story instead of the man who spent 3 decades trying to give you a better life than I had." David's breathing was ragged on the other end of the line. I could picture him in their kitchen, probably leaning against the counter I'd installed, Mary beside him with mascara streaking down her cheeks. "We can't make the mortgage payment," he said finally, and all the fight had gone out of his voice. "The car insurance lapsed yesterday. Jake needs new school clothes, and Mary's hours got cut at the salon. The dishwasher you fixed, it's leaking again, and we can't afford to call someone." Each admission felt like a small surrender, but I felt no satisfaction in his defeat. Only a deep, bone-tired sadness. Those sound like the problems of independent adults. "Damn it, Dad!" His voice cracked completely now. "We need—" "What you need," I interrupted, but gently now, like I was talking to Jake, "is to figure out how to live within your means. What you need is to learn the skills that most adults learn in their 20s, not their 40s. What you need is to stop blaming other people for your choices and start making better ones." "And Jake?" His voice dropped to a whisper, and I knew he was finally playing the card he thought would break me. "What about Jake? You're willing to let him suffer because of your pride?" The question hit its target perfectly, and we both knew it. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of every Saturday afternoon, every bedtime story, every proud moment when Jake showed me his artwork or told me about his day. My grandson's face floated behind my eyelids, confused, hurt, wondering why the adults he trusted were tearing his world apart. Jake is suffering, I said quietly, and my voice carried all the pain I'd been holding back. He's suffering because his parents chose to declare war on the one person who's always been there for him. He's suffering because you'd rather protect your egos than protect his sense of security. I opened my eyes, stared at my reflection in the window, older, warier, but somehow clearer than I'd seen myself in years. And yes, David, I am heartbroken that my grandson is caught in the middle of this, but I won't be held hostage by threats to his well-being, especially when those threats are coming from his own parents. So that's it. David's voice was hollow now, defeated. You're just cutting us off? Abandoning your own family? I'm doing exactly what you told me to do, I said, and there was no triumph in my voice, only exhausted truth. I'm respecting your independence. I'm stopping my manipulative help. I'm no longer swooping in to save the day. I paused, let the irony settle between us like dust. The only difference is that now you're seeing what your independence actually costs. You bastard. David. My voice cut through his anger like a blade, sharp and final. You have my number. When you're ready to have an honest conversation, not about money, but about respect, about family, about how we got here and how we move forward, call me. When you're ready to apologize to your son for using him as a weapon in your war against me, call me. Until then, enjoy your independence. I hung up and sat in the growing darkness of my living room, the weight of 30 years settling around me like a blanket. Outside, the wind rustled through the oak trees I'd planted when David was still a teenager, and I realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting and let the truth speak for itself. The phone didn't ring again that night, but I knew it would, eventually. And when it did, the conversation would be very different from the ones we'd been having for 30 years. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.